Good evening. Today I have a new instrument to show you, and this is which is a curved Bohemian style European baritone. So this instrument itself is an Amati brand instrument made in the Czech Republic. Now, the word baritone is probably the most generic title to be given to an instrument. So if we look up here, I've got a mellophone. It's a name that registers itself with that instrument. I have a cornet, I have a trumpet, I have many things on my wall of many things. Yet in my hands here I have a baritone. It doesn't have a special name, it is just baritone. And it's just a voice like soprano, alto, tenor, bass, baritone. This is not what most of you who subscribe to this channel will think of when you hear a baritone. If you hear the word baritone, you might see in your mind something like the brass band tradition of what a baritone should look like, something like this. Or you might see perhaps one of the more American marching style ideas of what a baritone would look like, something like this. Or you might think of the marching baritone. All of these instruments have some distinctive similarities, however they come from two very different developmental paths. This instrument here, the European style baritone, is developed from a bugle. They took the bugle, they added rotary valves to it, and over the course of a period of time they came up with this as the baritone voice. It was part of a bugle. Whereas in the brass band tradition, the UK brass band tradition, and in the American marching band traditions and concert bands and all that, the baritone that they'll be familiar with didn't come from, or didn't come directly from a bugle. They are part of the sax horn family. So two very different ways that these instruments have developed. Now, some of you might be aware of an instrument called a Wagner Tuba or a Vogner Tuba, depending on how you pronounce it. And you may think that this looks very similar to one of those, and indeed it does. But there is one key difference between this, which is a baritone, and the Vogner Tuba, and that is that the Wagner Tuba, depending on how you pronounce your W's, is played with the left hand. The valves are articulated over here, as opposed to over here with your right hand. So if you're thinking that you're going to be clever and call this a Wagner Tuba, you're wrong. So if we go and peer into some of the depths of the construction of this instrument, we notice firstly that it's made of raw, unfinished brass. It doesn't have any lacquer over it, which means that the instrument is likely to get very tarnished over time. And indeed that is what we see with this instrument. There are bits of it that I've cleaned, like up here, which look all lovely and nice and dandy, and there are bits that I haven't cleaned, like just in here. The whole instrument needs cleaning. I just haven't gotten around to doing it. So I was so gripped by passion and enthusiasm for making a video for you that I put it before cleaning of this instrument. And also the chemicals that I use are a little bit whiffy, and I've had about enough of them that I can handle for the day. It has 4 rotary valves, and unlike the Ukrainian or the Soviet implementation of these rotary valves, these ones are actually a delight to play. The 4th one is a bit clunky because there are no corks anymore on the valve straps, but there is on the valve stops. But there is no play in the valves. They articulate quickly, and they work really quite nicely. And that's something you cannot say about that Soviet era tenor horn, which is why it's on my wall of many things. The 4 valves are otherwise the standard arrangement. The first valve drops the pitch by a tone, the second valve drops it by half a tone, the third valve drops it by a tone and a half, and the 4th valve is the same as pressing 1 and 3. The same sort of valve arrangement that we have as standard and have had as standard for well over 150 years. One thing that irritates me about rotary valves is that quite often the people that make and design an instrument, they don't seem to understand that when you've got a rotor that turns one way in relation to the flow of air, you get one style of articulation, but when the rotor turns the opposite direction with the airflow going the same way, then you get a different type of articulation. So this instrument's got 4 rotors. 2 of them turn one way, 2 of them turn, the bottom 2 turn the opposite way, which means the articulation when you use the first 2 valves is different to the articulation when you use the second 2 valves. And when you're playing a phrase, that's something that can, it's one of the quirks that you have to get used to when you try to play this instrument, particularly when you're trying to do some fancy slurring or some fancy passages, because even though I'm not much of a brass player in the grand scheme of things, it's something that I notice. Particularly because all of my experience up until the last couple of years was with piston valve instruments, and with piston valve instruments the valves go up and down. There isn't that level of you don't need to worry about the way that the valves rotate, because they don't rotate, they just go up and down. And so when I, who have spent all of my life playing on piston valve instruments, go to a rotary valve instrument like this, it's one of those things that I notice. Now in the UK and American traditions of concert bands and brass bands, there is often this big question, is it a baritone or a euphonium? In European bands we don't have that same argument because they don't have euphoniums. Euphoniums aren't a tradition that they have there because they are based off the sax horn as opposed to one of these. What they have instead is the argument, is it a tenor horn or a baritone? Both instruments are in the same key, what we would call B flat, what they would call B, and they have the same length of tubing and so forth. The only differences are the bell dimensions and the thickness of the tubing. So up here, which you probably can't see, but you will see if I tilt the camera slightly, is a Ukrainian or a Soviet era tenor horn. Has the same amount of tubing, it's in the same key, etc., but it has thinner tubing, it's got a smaller bore, and the bell is smaller. Whereas this instrument has thicker tubing, and it also has a slightly bigger bell. Now that being said, this instrument is still smaller in terms of bore, in terms of bell size, than what we would refer to as a typical euphonium. What I have here is a large bore trombone mouthpiece. Fits in large bore trombones, bass trombones, fits in euphoniums perfectly. If I try to fit it in here, it fits just, but it doesn't. It needs to go perhaps another 2 centimeters to fit properly. Whereas if I get a mouthpiece like this one here, which is a mouthpiece that fits in a brass band style baritone and also fits in a medium small bore tenor trombone, and try to put that mouthpiece in here, it goes in too far. So the bore of this instrument is quite bizarre. It's sort of between what we would call a standard traditional medium small bore instrument and a large bore instrument. The bell flare, the bell is about the same size as a bass trombone. It's about 9.5 inches. I haven't measured that, but I know my handspan is just over 9.5 inches, and this is smaller than my handspan. The extract that I played at the start of this video was an extract out of the solo Slavish Fantasy, and I'm going to play, just now I'm going to play a part out of a different piece of music, and my challenge to you is, what is this piece of music called? Either in English or the original language that it was written in. But if anyone out there knows what this is called, I will give you a t-shirt. I've just teamed up with a company to provide t-shirts with the Trombone logo on them. So if you know a trombonist in your life, or you happen to be one yourself, feel free to pop over to the store where you can buy various articles of clothing and so forth that have this logo on it. I'm currently in the process of making some other designs that I'll feature soon, but in the meantime you can get one of these t-shirts for yourself. It helps me out very greatly. But if you are the first person to correctly guess what piece this next extract comes out of, I'll buy you one myself.